Hey guys, how's it going? Louis here from Singularity Film, and in today's video we are going to be comparing the all-new Samyang 24-70 f2.8 lens against the very lens I'm filming on right now, the Sony 24-105 f4. Now chances are if you shoot on Sony, or if you've been looking for a bit of a workhorse of a zoom lens that can really do it all for around about £1,000, then you've probably come across both of these lenses whilst doing your research, which is exactly the reason why we put this video together today for you all. And in this video we'll be covering 5 key comparisons between the two lenses to hopefully help you guys make your mind up about which one to go for. So let's start by talking about the design and overall build quality then. Now in all honesty, both lenses feel premium, both feel very high quality and really rugged and sturdy, and they both have their own forms of weather protection against water and dust, but they're not completely weather sealed, so you do need to be cautious when using both of them outside or in bad conditions. So let's start by taking a closer look at the outside of the Samyang lens then. So of course we've got our zoom and our focus rings on the outside, and we've also got a little custom switch here. Now what this custom switch does is it allows you to change things like the aperture by using the focus ring rather than using the focus ring to focus. But when we take a closer look at the Sony lens, we have actually got far more in the way of controls. So now we've swapped over onto the Samyang, and we're going to talk through what we get on the Sony 24-105. So again, we've got our zoom ring, we've got our focus ring, but we have got a couple of more controls that we don't have on the Samyang. So first and foremost, we've got our autofocus manual focus button, which is pretty self-explanatory. We've also got a focus hold button on the side here, which is super useful if you focus and recompose like I do when I do a lot of photography as well as filmmaking. And also we have got the optical steady shot button, which I do just want to touch on really quickly. So as you can see guys, here's a shot on the Sony lens with optical steady shot off, and we'll now overlay a shot with it on, and as you can tell, a massive difference. The footage is far more stable and there's far less shake. So same again with the Samyang lens, we've got the camera body stabilization off. We'll now turn it on and you can see a huge difference again there. So I do just want to be really clear here about the optical steady shot. It's really nice to have on the outside of a lens, and obviously hopefully you guys could tell the difference that it made with having it on versus having it off on the Sony lens. Now with the Samyang, obviously you haven't got that on the outside of the lens, but chances are you're going to be using the Samyang lens with a camera that's got some form of stabilization already built into it, and you could see that there was literally no difference between the Sony lens with steady shot on versus the Samyang when we turn the internal body stabilization on my camera. Okay, let's get this set up. Right, so let's start talking autofocus then. Now I love using Sony lenses for a number of reasons, and one of them is because the autofocus in my experience has always been really fast and really reliable. Now don't get me wrong, it's not 100% all of the time, but I can be pretty confident, especially when I'm making videos like this. I can just put the lens on my camera, set it up to point towards myself and be confident that the shot is going to be in focus. But the same can also be said for the Samyang in my experience. So what we're going to do is set up a quick autofocus test and see which lens is quicker and more accurate. So starting off on the Samyang lens, moving in from different sides of the lens, I think it's fairly obvious this lens takes about 1 second to 2 seconds to find autofocus on my face, which is about the same length of time as the Sony. So jumping over to the Sony, as you can see here, same sort of length of time. There's no real obvious difference, although it did miss focus just here. But we're looking at about 1 to 2 seconds on both lenses. Okay, so let's start taking into consideration the main differences between these two lenses then, and we'll start with one of the most obvious ones, the fact that the Samyang can stop down as far as f2.8 in comparison to the 24-105, which stops down to a maximum of f4. So what does that actually mean in terms of real world use? Well, first and foremost, just check out how nice and blurry the background is behind me. The background is just super smooth, and there is definitely a noticeable difference between filming at 2.8 on the Samyang and f4 on the Sony. We will swap to the Sony in exactly the same setup in a minute, just so you can see the difference. But also it means that the Samyang is far better in low light. Let's jump over onto the f4 and let's see what the difference is. So here we are then, we're now on the Sony 24-105 f4. All of the in-camera settings are exactly the same, other than the fact that of course we're now at f4 rather than at 2.8 like we were on the Samyang. So hopefully you guys can tell a difference between the two shots. I'll put them side by side for you right now. So hopefully you can see a big difference first and foremost in terms of how much light is coming into the camera and how much that extra stop gives you, but also the difference between how blurry the background is. So we've already covered one of the key differences between these two lenses, but what about the other one? That is of course the focal range. So on the Samyang, we're maxed out at 70mm, whereas on the Sony, we can go to 105. So what we're going to do now is a zoom test to see what that extra 35mm gives us. Okay, so we're currently at 24mm on the Sony 24-105. So we're going to zoom into 70mm, which is of course the max range on the Samyang. And we're now going to take it that extra 35mm up to 105. So here we are on the Samyang lens. This is at 24mm, and we're now going to max the zoom out to 70mm. And lastly, the image quality. So here's a couple of images that we shot a little bit earlier today. We're now going to head into the studio and have a good look over some shots that we're about to set up. So as you can see, we photographed this brick wall here. This shot that you're seeing on screen now is on the Sony at 24mm f4, and we're now going to overlay the Samyang. So at 24mm f4, there is definitely more distortion and vignetting on the Samyang lens, which is quite noticeable. And it's also interesting that although the white balance was completely manual, the Samyang also looks a little warmer, which is also something I noticed when watching back some of the footage we'd filmed a little bit earlier. Now, what about the sharpness of the image? Well, interestingly, not only is the Samyang much sharper in the middle, it's also sharper near the corners of the image at 24mm as well. Now, next up, we've also taken shots at 50mm and at 70mm f4 on both lenses, and at 50mm the Samyang is still sharper. I think the overall image quality is far better on the Samyang, and it's a very similar story at 70mm. Now, we also took the same range of images across 24, 50mm and 70mm at f8, and I don't think there's any real difference. The Samyang is still much sharper. The vignetting and distortion is a little more obvious, but nothing that can't be fixed in Lightroom. So overall, I think the image quality is definitely superior on the Samyang. So the 24-105 f4 Sony or the Samyang 24-70 2.8, where do I think you guys should put your money? Well, in all honesty, this is a really difficult decision. It genuinely is. Now, after having tested both of these lenses for photography and videography, I think it's fair to say you're going to get professional results regardless of what lens you end up going for. They are very, very similar, but there are a couple of things I do just want to mention very quickly. And the first one that I haven't touched on yet is the weight of these lenses. So I'll put it up on screen now exactly what both of them weigh. Now, it's a very noticeable difference. Having the Samyang on a neck strap on the camera, I've got mine paired up with the Sony a7 III at the moment, or having it on the gimbal, it is very noticeable how much difference there is in terms of weight between the two. After using the Samyang all day, you feel it a little bit around the shoulders and your arms when you're holding it on the gimbal, especially in comparison to the Sony. So that is something to just have a little bit of a think about. If you really are torn between the two of them, then maybe it does just come down to the weight of them. But that is something that I did just want to mention there. But in all honesty, like I said, very, very similar results, photo or video. So I think really and truly, it's ultimately what you're going to be using these lenses for. And what are you going to need more? Do you need that 35mm focal length more, or do you need to be able to stop down to 2.8 more? So if you do lots of wildlife photography or videography or weddings or sports, having that extra 35mm to get you a little bit closer to the action when physically you can't move yourself nearer, then I think that's really important. And it does make a big difference, that extra 35mm from 70 to 105. So I would seriously consider the Sony 24-105 if that's the case. But if you're doing other things, you don't necessarily need that extra 35mm, then having the ability to stop down to 2.8 is huge. It really didn't hit home to me until I actually had these lenses side by side. The low light performance, that extra bit of depth of field and nicer background at 2.8, for me, that simply cannot be ignored. And honestly, if I didn't have either lens and I just had to choose one, I would go with the Samyang 24-70 2.8, purely because of the low light performance and that slightly nicer depth of field that you can achieve at 2.8. But that being said, they're both fantastic lenses. It'd be really great to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you all in the next video.